Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the completely hidden power dynamics of early telephone networks and the pioneering women who ran them. We so often think of early tech as just wires and machines, but the truth is, the entire system relied on a very specific, carefully managed human element.
Okay, let's totally shatter a historical assumption right out of the gate. Did you know the very first telephone operators weren't women at all? Nope, they were actually teenage boys. And frankly, they were an absolute disaster for the nascent telecom business. They were rude, totally impatient, and they literally swore at the customers. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll tackle the boy operator problem, then look at creating the hello girl. After that, romancing the disembodied voice, followed by respectable economic independence, weaponizing the switchboard, and finally, the end of the line. All right, part one, the boy operator problem. Let's see why the booming telecom industry initially faced an absolute crisis on their lines. Back in the day, companies desperately needed cheap labor to physically connect calls, right? So they naturally turned to the telegraph industry's main workforce, which was young boys. But there was an incredibly sharp contrast between these aggressive, rowdy boys and the polite, submissive workers the industry quickly realized they needed. Historical accounts describe the boys as young imps who played tricks with wires and literally fought with subscribers over the line. It was pure chaos. To keep their wealthy customers, companies realized they had to pivot completely. To really grasp the scale of this failure, get a load of this exact quote from an AT&T chief engineer. He described the boy operators as being but a little lower than the wild Indian. I mean, wow. Industry leaders quickly concluded that if they stuck with boys, they were practically facing bankruptcy. A massive shift was required. Which brings us to part two, creating the hello girl. Let's look at exactly how the telecom industry went about systematically manufacturing this perfect, civilized female workforce to save their business. See, companies didn't just want anyone who could plug in a wire. They demanded a rigid, respectable ideal to soothe their upper-middle-class subscribers. Drawing heavily on Victorian-era ideologies, managers constructed the ideal operator as a virtuous lady. They implemented highly selective personnel policies to guarantee a specific, civilized, white lady image, rejecting thousands of applicants based on strict social criteria. You literally wouldn't believe the hiring requirements they came up with. Getting this job was incredibly demanding. You couldn't just have a nice voice. You had to have the exact arm length to reach the top of the switchboard, be slim enough to squeeze into the operating room, have perfect vision without glasses, and prove absolute moral purity vouched for by 3 people, including a clergyman. Oh, and absolutely no consumptive coughs. They were engineering a highly, highly controlled workforce. Okay, move into part 3, romancing the disembodied voice. With all these strict standards in place, things started getting a little weird. A completely bizarre phenomenon emerged, where male callers began deeply romanticizing the women on the line. They developed this poetic obsession, describing operators' voices as being musical as the woodsy voices of a summer day. Because early telephones were incredibly frustrating and unreliable to use, companies leaned heavily on this sweet symphony of female voices to act as a comforting, almost mythical presence to keep callers happy. The operator's voice basically acted as a labor of love that completely melted away the anger of irascible businessmen, like mountain snows before a southern wind. According to writers of the time, even the most petulant, hurried subscriber couldn't help but be quieted and soothed by the dignified voice on the other end. The companies were quite literally monetizing feminine charm. And this infatuation absolutely bled right into reality. A 1902 news story from the New York Evening World details a male subscriber who literally married an operator he fell in love with purely over the telephone wire. He reportedly begged her to connect me with your heart. No way, right? The operator was no longer just a worker. She had become a primary object of romance and fascination in the public imagination. Let's dive into part 4, respectable economic independence. Because while corporations and callers focused entirely on romantic illusions, these women were secretly carving out their own powerful reality behind the switchboard. When you hear about historical wage data from 1880, seeing an average monthly wage of $8 looks incredibly low to us today. But back then, it represented a massive, totally unprecedented leap toward economic independence for single women. Previously, respectable work for them was mostly limited to overcrowded teaching jobs, factories, or domestic work. The telephone exchange opened a brand new door for them to actually earn their own money. And despite the grueling pressure and low pay, operators felt a genuine thrill and glamour in their work. They realized they were an essential, highly respected part of modern civilization. One early operator actually recalled how it was a daily occurrence to literally guide grown businessmen through using a telephone for the very first time. They were the gatekeepers to the future, and they knew it made them vital to their communities. This takes us to part 5, weaponizing the switchboard. Let's see how these operators fully realized the immense power they held at the center of the network. You see, these women were absolutely not just passive machines. They developed secret, highly effective tactics to punish abusive callers and assert their own hidden authority. The job was incredibly nerve-wracking, so if a subscriber was arrogant, savvy operators hit back. They might give them the busy back click, ring the bell directly into a rude man's ear to deafen him, or just let an impatient caller wait in the dark and rattle his hook. They had absolute control over the flow of information. This empowered reality was even recognized in pop culture. Just look at the 1928 film A Lady of Chance. Norma Shearer plays Dolly Angelface Morgan, a grifter who actively uses her position as a telephone operator to eavesdrop, target, and manipulate wealthy gentlemen. It's a perfect example of how society was starting to realize just how much leverage these invisible women actually had, totally subverting the submissive hello girl trope to their own advantage. Finally, part 6. End of the line. Let's explore how this really unique era of female-dominated network control ultimately came to a close. Ironically, the massive push for automation wasn't just about speed. The Strowger automatic dial, invented in 1889 by a funeral director, was explicitly designed to establish a girlless, cussless telephone. It ushered in the era of rotary phones, allowing callers to bypass the operator entirely. Over time, it slowly rendered the powerful human operator completely obsolete, effectively erasing those complex human power dynamics that had defined the early telephone exchange. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself a question. How often do our modern, sleek technologies deliberately hide the vital human labor that actually keeps them running? Just as the early telephone relied on the hidden labor and subtle power of the hello girls, modern tech often conceals the human effort that makes it function. It's a fascinating piece of history with a lesson that absolutely still rings true today. Thanks for joining me.